Hello friends, good morning, and this is the CEC-UGC EduSat network, and we are running a series on Indian writing in English and various aspects of it, the background, the social milieu that generated energies captured by this writing, and related aspects are a part of this program. Today we have Dr. Payal Nagpal from Delhi University to talk about a very important dramatic voice in Indian writing in English, and the topic is Girish Karnad as a dramatist. Dr. Payal Nagpal is a theatre person, a person who has done exclusive work on drama, is there with us, and let's be benefited by her knowledge and by her elucidation. Welcome Dr. Payal Nagpal, and please tell us about your topic and the range and the general things that you would like to discuss. Dr. Payal Nagpal.
Today's lecture will be on Girish Karnad as a dramatist, a playwright, and he's written many plays and has been writing since 1960. And today we will focus on plays that he had written in Kannada and has translated into English himself. So these plays are plays that he has written up till 1994, because after that, he's written plays in English. So these are also plays that we feel that that belong to the author in English as a language, because he has translated them himself. So another very important factor in today's lecture will be the fact that through his personal experiences about the place he grew up in, and what were the different theatrical traditions that actually influenced Girish Karnad. Through this, we will be able to understand, in a sense, the evolution of Indian English theatre. And this will shed light on some very important factors about the way in which theatres actually developed in India. So, to begin with the lecture, Girish Karnad was born in 1938, and the playwright came into a world, where when we say 1938, we're talking about pre-independence India. And later he, of course, he studied at Bombay, Karnataka universities and moved on to Oxford after he received the Rhodes Scholarship. He did his masters in philosophy, politics and economics. And later, when he came back to India, he joined the Oxford University Press and worked for 7 years at their Madras office. He was very majorly influenced by the works of Jean Anouilh, Brecht, Pinter, Strindberg, many playwrights actually. So if we look at his personal graph, we realize that he had exposure both to places in India, and he had exposure to theatre from the West. And this in a way is something that Karnad talks about himself also in all his interviews, and the way in which it influenced him. And when we say influenced him, it is not as if he took on from the West, but his understanding of theatre in the West actually triggered a series of questions about what drama should be like in the context of India. If we talk about the number of languages that he knows, I'd like to cite K. Sachidanandan's comment about Girish Karnad. He says, born to Konkani, nurtured in Kannada, schooled in English, cultivated in Marathi and Hindi. Karnad handles all of them with ease, but prefers to do his creative writing in Kannada. At the same time, the fact that here is an author who writes in a language that he's comfortable with, but also reaches out to more and more people through the process of translation, which of course allows him to recreate his plays in a certain way. So his journey as playwright actually began when he got the scholarship to go abroad. And it's very interesting, in his interviews, Karnad talks about how before he left, he actually did everything that he had not expected. The first was that he wanted to be a poet, but he ended up writing a play. He wanted to be an English poet, but he did not write in English to begin with, and he wrote in Kannada. He was very surprised at himself for having picked up a story from the Mahabharata. So he wrote Yayati. Yayati is the play that he writes in 1961. So the beginnings, in a sense, as Karnad explains, come as a surprise to him also. And so when we look at some of his experiences of the place where he grew up in a very small town called Sirsi, which is close to Karwar in Karnataka, and the period that we are looking at is the 1940s. So and in this particular period, I'm actually using a lot of the comments made by Karnad himself in his interviews, and here it's important to mark that the kind of plays that he saw taught him and trained him in a certain manner. And some of these influences were, for instance, there were the touring the Natak companies in the south, and these were largely offshoots of the Parsi theatre of that time. And the second very important theatrical tradition that he was influenced by was the Yakshagan. And the Yakshagan happened after the harvest. It was a song of nature's spirits and made use of elaborate costumes, especially the headgear and so on. And of course, with the accompaniment of music and other forms of expression such as dance. So the Yakshagan generally puts up performances based on stories from the ancient texts, the Kavyas and the Puranas. Now, it's interesting to note how Karnad explains that the company nataks were, they made use of the gas or the Petromax lamps, and in the case of the Yakshagan, however, these performances happen in the presence of the torchlight, right? And there was a kind of hierarchical difference here between the plays that were performed by the touring companies and the Yakshagan. So, for instance, he says that he would always watch the plays put up by these touring Nata companies, as they were called, with his parents. Whereas in the case of the Yakshagan performances, his parents would certainly not be seen there, and it is in the presence of the house workers and so on that he would actually go and watch the Yakshagan performances. Also, in terms of stagecraft, they employed two very different modalities. So, where you see the touring companies generally used a proper proscenium, and it was which projected theatre in a certain manner. In the case of the Yakshagan, it was a simple platform with the canopy. So as I said, that this allows us to understand that this is how theatre was in the pre-independence period in India. So in the 60s, he says that he explains how through the proscenium stage, before we actually move on to the 60s, he explains how through the proscenium stage, the idea of entertainment, it introduced a kind of secularism on stage. Now, this was very, very important because this was a new element that comes through the touring Nata companies. But this secularism was there to be seen on stage. It is not something that was put into practice in in the kind of in the way that the society was structured, for instance. So another, apart from these two major influences, on Karnad's life, the third very important factor was when he went abroad and, he watched plays over there. And there was this, again back in India, when he watched Ibrahim Alkazi's production of Strindberg's Miss Julie at the Prithvi Theatre, that transformed his sense of theatre. So, for somebody who grew up in Sirsi, and when he moved to a place like Bombay, he saw theatre which visualized and presented itself very differently. And what we mean by that is that, this whole idea that faders could be used, dimmers could be used in lights, the fact that lights need not be simply a switch on and a switch off kind of mode, but that characters and their psychological makeup could be actually presented on stage through the dimmers. If there is an intense thought, how you project that using lights is something that he saw for the first time in Bombay. So, there's lights dimming, faders, a kind of interiority that could be brought out on stage. And, in an interview with Tutun Mukherjee, Karnad says that the new technology was accompanied by a new psychology. So from gas and petromax lamps and plays happening in torchlight, and I mean, if you come to think of it, the Yakshagan performances happen through the night, and so you know, the use of torches there. From there to come to Bombay, where he sees you know, lights being used and manipulated in a very different way to actually present the story differently. So this is one part. Now the second thing that, you know, he was particularly struck by with this performance of Miss Julie, the production of Miss Julie that he saw, he says that characters, and I quote from one of his interviews, he says, the two characters could actually stand and strip themselves bare and tear each other to pieces, seemed to me almost obscene. Because I came from a lower middle class background where you didn't say things, certain things were not mentioned and so on. So the fact that we project one part of us to the world, and there is something else that goes on inside us, and it's this interiority that was brought out through the impact of theatre from the West. And we are talking about Strindberg's Miss Julie, and he's you know, the specific production that Karnad mentions is Ibrahim Al-Qazi's adaptation of the same. So his experience, through his experiences, we arrive at some very important questions, very crucial questions. And this is something that he, as a person who grew up in the midst of these different influences, asks himself, and is something for us also to think about, which is, why write a play? And the second is, you know, who do you emulate? So in, you know, I mean, suddenly in post-independence India, if you have to evolve a theatrical tradition here, what would that tradition really be? So today, of course, you know, for us in 2016 to look back at all these questions is very, very important to understand that things have evolved over a period of time. And it's the contribution of playwrights like Girish Karnad that have actually lent and given you know, theatre a specific form. So in the first phase, I've already mentioned how he's very surprised, you know, just when he's about to go abroad and writes Yayati, and is greatly influenced by Jean Ennui and his play Antigone, which is, you know, again an adaptation of the Greek play in the modern context. So he looks at this notion of, you know, individualism that is brought out by theatre in the West, and he feels that this notion of individualism is there in the West, but it's not there in India in that time. And to kind of present it on stage would, in a sense, be you know, not taking into cognizance or not acknowledging the specific context in which one is placed. So Karnad doesn't do that, and he says that, you know, he diffuses also to these two very important factors that come in from theatre from the West, you know, the whole Ibsen-Strindberg tradition. One being this idea of individualism, and the second is, of course, the whole notion of naturalistic theatre, where the drawing room space, the living room space, so to say, is the place where everything is discussed. And Karnad has some very interesting inputs to make here. He says in the West, the living room is the space in which important issues are discussed, but in the case of but India, it's not so. And he says, and I quote from one of his interviews again, he says, nothing of consequence ever happens or is supposed to happen in the Indian living room. And this is very important because he says, think about the spaces of the kitchen. And that's where a lot of you know, conversations happen amongst women and so on. And these are conversations that will actually never travel to the living room. So here is a playwright who's at a very early stage grappling with the problem of what is the theatrical idiom going to be like in India. And again, he says one very important reason why you know, this kind of formula is not going to, which works in the West, is not going to work in India, is because there are issues, there are inequalities at various levels. So people who are marginalized do not have access to the living room space. I mean, come to think of it, at times, you know, women are also kind of relegated literally to the margins where they do not have access to these spaces. So how can they come and speak? And Western theatre, in this sense, you know, he says, and its structure could not address the complexities of the Indian social situation. And here I think I'd also request Dr. Prakash to comment on the relationship between naturalistic theatre and the way it's visualized, or it can be visualized in the context of India.
Dr. Nagpal, there are quite a few interesting things that you have said, and I didn't know much about them. For instance, a poet becoming a dramatist, a poet who has to express oneself, who has to give one's views on society that one lives in, and this person suddenly decides to write plays and be a part of the theatre. How is that done generally? In the case of an individual in India, that one is a poet and one then turns to drama. What would have happened in your opinion in the case of Karnad? Why would he do it?
I think it's difficult to speak with respect to the individual per se, but I think one of the obvious reasons could be the fact that he used to go for a lot of plays, and somewhere I think the concept of expression through theatre is something that I'm sure he must have internalized there. And so for him, I guess the most natural expression, though he wanted to be a poet and was greatly influenced by, he said for him to be a poet also meant to be an English poet, and the likes of Auden and Eliot. But when he actually starts expressing himself, it turns out to be in the form of drama and not in the form of poetry.
You mean in drama there is scope to understand society better? As an individual, when you write poetry, then there is one kind of thing you do, but then one doesn't know much about the world. So in order to know about the world and be active there, that might have attracted him to the domain of theatre. What do you say?
Absolutely. More in a sense, I mean, one is not making generic comparisons, but the fact that it's a more alive, more active, there's a kind of versatility that is involved in this form of expression, and I think that particularly influenced Karnad.
You mean visualizing society on the stage and getting connected with it, speaking their language, communicating to them, learning from them, that's what attracted him?
Yes, also because I think one of the prime concerns, and which is why we can see that all his plays lead to developments in theatre of a very different kind. So, and one of the prime reasons for that is his honesty in understanding his own society. That is something that he is very clear about, and he does not give in to the pressures of the structures that are there, that he is familiar with and he is well acquainted with from the West. He has tremendous exposure, having watched a lot of these plays, but he does not give in to that. And then again, he also does not, he says that both these forms, the touring Natak company form, which takes on from the Parsi theatre, and the second being, the Yakshagan. He said in the 1940s, both of these were actually, a dying art form. Mm-hmm. So there was also this urge, I think, in him to evolve a new theatrical tradition.
Okay, which means that he is getting a kind of education in drama when he is interacting with the world outside, and then he is also giving a kind of education, getting education from the audience and then giving education back to them, and then evolving, and there will be all kinds of phases. I could see hints of you're tracing his career as a dramatist from this beginning to something else.
Yes, because the beginning is very important, not only for his personal graph or him as a playwright, but as I said, for us also to visualize how theatre in certain parts of India evolved, from the pre-independence period to the way it is visualized in the post-independence period. So certainly this notion that he should be able to come up with a structure that takes into cognizance the complexities of the situation in India, and he really does that very well. Especially when he says that it's the living room is not the space where something can happen, because in the context of India, the kitchens, the maybe just talking to somebody at the gate, lots of these conversations happen, and these are what need to be brought in. So as mentioned. So he says how to use the traditional forms of theatre in post-independence India. And so he says that where some playwrights did try and revive the Yakshagan or the Kathakali, he asks about the role to be played, he says, by city dwellers. The term he uses is city dwellers. So for somebody like him, who's finally moved on from the remote parts of Karnataka to places like Bombay and so on, slightly mainstream, and then somebody who's also had exposure to theatre in the West. So how does he struggle with these ideas and evolve the tradition of drama in India, which he says is akin to him he sees himself as a city dweller. He mentions how Bertolt Brecht's writings particularly sensitized him about the potentialities of non-naturalistic techniques. And he very briefly mentions alienation, in one case.
What is naturalism? How do you understand naturalism?
When we discuss naturalism, we are basically talking, if we look at the way it was introduced in the West, it's a late 19th century movement, and it's an offshoot of realism. And basically to look at the surface reality in society, to see things as they are. And which is where Karnad's intervention becomes very important. Because when we say that we must see things as they are, the lens also has to be the realistic lens. It cannot be a lens that we have actually borrowed from the West. The lens has to be, be created here in India.
In realism, is there scope for entertainment?
Yes. There is tremendous scope for entertainment, and again, I'll refer to what Karnad says himself. He says that when he talks about the company Natak performances and so on, he says there was this element of secularism and entertainment, these two factors that are brought in. The problem being that there was a gap between what was being presented on stage and the social reality of India at the time, which was still, trying to bring in this secularism. It was pretty much not there.
And so, what is secularism?
Secularism here he uses not in the sense of religion or anything, but the idea that there is a kind of rationality. For him, secularism is that rationality. It's that rational element that is kind of brought in. And the word he uses is specifically secularism, but what he's talking about is a kind of rationality in the context of India. So where people would be more open to modern ideas. So he says through certain performances, those ideas were being put up on stage, but the social reality was not really incorporating that kind of modernity. So which is why drama also becomes a way for him to combine certain traditions in India with the element of modernity. And that's the road that he takes ahead.
That's an important point you're making, yes. That's quite true.
So which is where he talks about, and he especially mentions Bertolt Brecht and the fact that there is tremendous potential in the non-naturalistic techniques, because in the non-naturalistic techniques he's able to create that zone, that space where he can refer to traditions in India. So this realization of the need for a new form and idiom in Indian theatre brings him to the use of myth, and he of course credits Dharamveer Bharti also for the use of myth in a play like Andhayog. So if myth is one important aspect of Karnad's plays, and the other factor is history, that's again a very persistent engagement in his plays. And he mentions how the Kannada critic Kirtinath Koti once told him that no Indian playwright had actually been able to handle history. And the example that he takes is Bertolt Brecht's Galileo. He says that in the context of India, we have not been able to do a play like that. And with these two felt needs, one of course the need to evolve a theatrical tradition in the context of India, and here of course he latches on to the concept of the myth, and he moves on to also write plays that kind of foreground some sense of history there. So his engagement with society, his urge to work out new approaches in plays, these ideas pervade all his plays, and which is why an exercise in understanding Karnad's plays is also one in understanding Indian theatre. So if we were to actually look at the plays that he has written, Aparna Bhargav Dharwarkar actually gives us two ways of looking at the plays. The first beginning with Yayati, 1961, to Hit and Hunja in 1980. And the second phase begins with this play, Nagamandal, in 1988 and continues to the present. Another way of looking at the entire collection of plays that Karnad has written, we look at it in terms of the ancient myth with plays like Yayati and Bali and Fire and the Rain. Then again with pre-modern and modern history, we have plays like Tughlaq, Taledand, The Dreams of Tipu Sultan. Then we have plays that deal with folk tales like Haivadan and Nagamandal and Flowers. Then there are plays that focus on scenes from contemporary life like Driven Snow and Broken Images. And finally his latest play that came out in 2009, The Wedding Album. But we will focus more on his entire collection in terms of language. So plays, as I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, that plays written up till 1994 were all written in Kannada and then translated into English by the author. And post 1994, he has written plays in English and then translated some of them, into Kannada. So again, also his play, The Wedding Album, is a play that is of a totally different kind. But in this lecture today, we are going to look at some of the plays, that were written up till the 1990s, early 1990s. So in response to Kirtinath Kurkoti's comment on the lack of engagement with history, Karnad mentions how he actually took up, to begin with, he just picked up a very elementary school history book, and he came across the figure of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and who was, the Sultan of Delhi from in the 14th century, 1324 to about 1351. And he talks about two very important aspects of Tughlaq's reign. One, of course, the shifting of capital from Delhi to Daulatabad, and the second was the change in currency from silver to copper. And these two factors are, of course, recreated in dramatized form. Now, the question that we need to ask first and foremost is, what is the appeal of a 14th century ruler to a 20th century playwright writing at a time, in the early 1970s, at a time when the nation is busy kind of, or reinventing itself and looking for modern ways, or looking for ways to modernize itself. And here it's an oft quoted comment on Tughlaq, but I will share it with you here. So Karnad says in one of his interviews, he says, "What struck me about Tughlaq's history was that it was contemporary. The fact that here was the most idealistic, the most intelligent king ever to come on the throne of Delhi, and one of the greatest failures also. And within a span of 20 years, this tremendously capable man had gone to pieces. This seemed to be both due to his idealism as well as his shortcomings within him, such as his impatience, his cruelty, his feeling that he had the only correct answer. And I felt in the early 60s, India had also come very far in the same direction. The 20-year period seemed to me a very striking parallel." So it's this element of modernity. It's this element there's something very contemporary about reading a historical figure in the 20th century. And this influences Karnad in a very big way and determines his choice of Tughlaq for his play. And he says that in an interview with Tutun Mukherjee, when he's asked, is this a play that comments on Nehruvian India? So he says, "The play certainly reflects the disillusionment that my generation felt with the new politics of independent India, the realpolitik, the cynicism, the gradual erosion of ethical norms. Different generations seem to find in it some understanding of their socio-political conditions." I think in 2016, when we look at this play that's written in 1970, we also need to take cue from this very significant line here, that different generations seem to find in it some understanding of their socio-political conditions. So this play remains relevant. There have been umpteen performances of Karnad's Tughlaq, and as Anantamurthy, your Anantamurthy has rightly said that the play is more than a political allegory. So keeping these two factors in mind, we also need to understand that this play not only at the level of theme but also at the level of stagecraft. So for instance, because the two are very closely connected here, in this particular play, Karnad states, how he uses the model of the Parsi theatre and this division that is there between what is called the deep and the shallow scenes. And he says that when he actually began writing this play, it's the shallow scenes that took over. And, the second part of the play, he says, totally rebelled against this imposition of form. And the shallow scenes became more energetic and vigorous, and the deep scenes emptier, leading up to the final scene when the minor character appears on a par with the protagonist. Good morning, viewers. Today we will be discussing Girish Karnad's plays, and the play that we are discussing first and foremost is Karnad's Tughlaq. There are different ways in which we can look at Karnad's Tughlaq, and one of the primary concerns will be how does he look at this historical figure in the context of post-independence India, and how do we today relate to a play like Tughlaq? And so is it just a political allegory, or is there a certain psychology of the character that is the historical figure that is brought out? People have also looked at the whole idea of existence in the context of the king and so on. So if we two very important scenes that come towards the end of Tughlaq that are very important, also because that is where the division between the deep and shallow scenes is totally dissolved, in the sense that the more meaningful scenes that are performed in the deep and the shallow scenes which are supposed to give comic relief alone, that division is dissolved, and the comic scenes also, or scenes where I shouldn't say just the comic scenes, but scenes where the commoners are present. Now they become very, very significant. And for instance, there is a scene between a young and an old man, and a very disturbing conversation that takes place between the two, where the young man looks at the long white thing, the road from Daulatabad to Delhi, the widest road in the world. But he says, but it looks no bigger than a thin snake from here. And this is 5 years after the capital has been shifted from Delhi to Daulatabad in the play. And the old man says, he thinks about the time when people actually shifted, left their house, everything in Delhi, and they shifted to Daulatabad. So he says, and 4 years ago, that snake bit a whole city to death. Yes, it's a long passage, a big passage, coiled like an enormous hollow python inside the belly of the fort. And we shall be far, far happier when that python breaks out and swallows everything in sight. So this this long winding road is a reminder, and which is why the idea of the python comes in, reminder of the kind of human loss that had happened in this transition from Delhi to Daulatabad. And this is very closely tied to the historian Burney's plea, because Burney figures as a character in the play. He says that, Your Majesty, there was a time you believed in love, in peace, in God. What has happened to those ideals? You torture them for the smallest offense, hang them on suspicion. Why this bloodshed? And to this, Tughlaq replies by saying that, but for that, he will have to admit that he's wrong. So, the problematic of the king, where, he's implemented his policies and he cannot retract, or he cannot accept that some of them had gone wrong. So, and he acknowledges full well that, people have now started calling him the Mad Muhammad. He says that in the play. So, again, a very important scene in the play, which is the citizen scene, scene 11, and it is one of the most disturbing scenes, that one has read. The kind of violence and gore that is reported is very, very disturbing. So, the citizens present a very gruesome image of decadence and the debris of violence that is left around. So, the roads are, just take a look at some of the images that evoke horror. So, the roads are lined with skeleton, people are eating off the barks of trees, women have to make do with skins of dead horses, some have to eat burnt strips of skin. People crowd around a butcher's shop to catch the blood spurting from the slaughtered breasts, and so on. So this evokes the horrors faced by the commoners because of the incorrect policies that are implemented, and this combination of presenting a king who's actually thinking way ahead of his times, but is unable to actually taper his vision in terms of what is it that people require. And which is some of the things that one takes back from this play are as follows. So when Karnad recreates history to sharply comment on the policy making in post-independence India, what is the point that he really tries to make? Firstly, that policies have to be devised and evolved, keeping in mind the context and needs of the common people.
Is this theme taken up in other plays also of the playwright?
Yes, one of the plays that does take up, again, a part of history, and he refers to the 12th century Bhakti movement, and to talk about what is happening in India in the 1990s. So it's a play called Tale Dand.
Can you talk a little about this, because that will be of interest for me and others.
Yes, because in fact that's the next play that I'm not following the chronological order here, but because these two make a very important point here about history. So Tale Dand is a play that is published in English in 1993, and in Hindi it is translated as Rakt Kalyan, and it literally means Tale Dand means death by beheading, and it takes on the theme of caste inequality and politics, and basically brings in the 12th century Bhakti movement, the Veerashaiva movement, and the play centers, the protagonist is the Saint Basavanna. And it attacks ideas of the miracle, reminding people how actually the Bhakti movement refutes this notion, and the strength of the people united by Bhakti, and how as a group they start looking for miracles, and they start looking for individuals who will represent these miracles. And this is an idea that is totally critiqued in the play. And as Karnad mentions in a note, he says that during the 2 decades ending in 1168 in Kalyan, a man called Basavanna assembled a congregation of poets, mystics, social revolutionaries, and philosophers. And this period, he says, for Karnad, he says, is known for its creativity, It's courageous questioning and social commitment. And one can see the impact of Bertolt Brecht here, because he's using Taledan actually as an exact parallel to discuss the Indian scenario in the early 1990s. So and here too you see the transition from King Bijala, who's initially a supportive king, to his son, who's anarchic and foolish, that leads only to complete violence and disaster towards the end of the play, as this transition from father to son happens. And how where one king does the whole balancing act, and this is totally missing, that real politic is totally missing in the context of the son. So and how this unleashes divisive forces in the society. So
what exactly is he saying through this play?
He's straight away, the most obvious factor is that about caste inequality that he's talking about, and he's reminding people of the rationality that was brought in through the Bhakti movement. The fact that all sorts of rituals, miracles, these ideas were rejected, and the language of the common people became the important factor. And he tries to bring this back here, and at the same time he's also critical of people, for instance the Sharanas who've actually rejected any kind of religious dogma and so on. But the fact that they too are looking for miracles and are looking for individuals on whom to kind of paste these miracles and believe in them. So this kind of a creation of superstition is something that he's rejecting. And
it's a very bold play.
It's a very bold play. It's a very, very bold play. And though Tughlaq is a play that has been performed many, many times. Taledand is not been performed as many times, and the theme is very bold. And like Tughlaq, again, how these things can generate unease in the society, and even Taledand, you see, it again ends with people,
which also means that if the Bhakti movement is to be interpreted correctly, then this play will help in that. Yes. It has a kind of perspective on Bhakti movement. And
also a perspective on Bhakti movement that belongs not only to that period, but is very, very conversant with the present time.
With the 90s, that
with the 90s, and of course we can take it on even today. I think it makes a very, very, of course the play is basically about what's happening in the 90s.
Which means the kind of stalemate that Indian society has, that is sought to be broken by him through his plays.
Yes.
So his play is with a purpose. It is a committed play.
Yes, it is a committed play. And one can say this with great conviction about, I think, all of Karnad's plays, that this kind of, honesty and commitment to, what he's representing, the society that he's representing in his plays is there, which is why I think the plays are performed and discussed even today. So, so with these two particularly, that is Tughlaq and Taledand, are plays that deal with, part of history. And then there are other plays that I'll be discussing.
I think that will be good to
Hayvadan and Hayvadan, that is the man with the horse's head, which came in 1975. And I will say, the dates that I'm giving are of the English publications, not of the Kannada. So the plot is based on the story from the Katha Sarit Sagar. And Karnad gives his debt also to Thomas Mann's story, The Transposed Heads. And the debate is, what is more important? Is it the mind or is it the body? So in a nutshell, there are two friends, and one of them, both of course are in love with this woman, but Devadatt is married to Padmini, and each friend almost kind of making a sacrifice for the other. They chop their heads off, and the goddess is then kind to, just as Padmini is about to give up her life, the goddess is kind enough to intervene, and in the dark, however, Padmini kind of puts exchanges the heads, in the sense that the wrong head on the body. So you have Devadatt, whose body has his friend Kapila's head, and vice versa. So this dichotomy about the mind and the body, how is that resolved? So where I think in the source and in Thomas Mann's story also, there is a sort of resolution suggested where Thomas Mann says that it's the mind that is more important, and the mind, the body has to taper itself according to the mind. Karnad does not resolve it, and he says that the body too has its own language, and the body has its own logic, and he uses the folk theatre, to focus on these questions of identity. And he has things like, he says that the body also has its own memories. One of the characters, Kapila says, the body has its own memories. One beats the body into shape, but one can't beat away the memories in it. Isn't that surprising? That the body should have its own ghosts, its own memories, memories of touch. And so how do you resolve that? And that is something that doesn't happen, even though momentarily, it's decided that the one who has the head of the husband is going to be the husband and so on, but it doesn't work out. And this formula collapses, it fails, because Padmini still looks for Kapila, and she sees no resolution in sight, and the friends of course kill each other in what is a kind of a duel or something, but Padmini also gives up her life by becoming a sati, but that's a pointer which is not really kind of stressed for very long.
Would you call it a deeply philosophical play?
Yes, it is one of his most philosophical plays. It is I wanted to discuss this to bring out that there are different aspects, and each play kind of takes on not only a different kind of theme but also a different kind of theatrical modality. Even that is constantly being reworked. So if the historical plays have a modality of their own, here the modality that is employed is very different. So yes, it's a deeply philosophical, one of his most philosophical plays, so to say. So
in the sense, that there is a kind of reality which has its own logic, but then this reality and its logic has to be understood with mind, and mind has a role to play, and vice versa.
Right. Like and also in this place, though I mean, it's not something that has been widely discussed, but somewhere I feel he's also talking about the woman, her body and desire. I think that is also there, because if you look at the lines of the female chorus, they say that why should love stick to the sap of a single body when the stem I drunk with has thick yearning of the many petal lantana, why should it be tied down to the relation of a single flower? So these factors, and Padmini's constant yearning for Kapila, and still going there. Of course, the surface level, we have the whole philosophical debate, the mind-body debate, but there's also kind of expression and dimension that he gives to the female protagonist in the play, which is, I think,
it means a kind of feminism that also accepts the importance of the body.
Yes.
This feminism, says that a woman expresses herself through her mind, of course, but also through her body, and that she has something, to do in society, which will give her, kind of interest and appeal that comes from the reality of the body. Would you say that?
Yes, totally. I will certainly say this. As I said, that this is Hayavardhan is known primarily for the kind of philosophical debate that it focuses on, and how the two the source and Thomas Mann's story, the transposed heads, they look at resolution of sorts, but the play does not try to resolve this. And in fact, this is because it employs the folk form. So the encircling story is that of Hayavardhan, the man who has the horse's head, and that too is resolved keeping in mind the philosophical debate at the center, because he becomes the man who has the horse's head does not become a complete man at the end of it, but he becomes a complete horse. So it's the body in that sense that takes primacy, and I think he's really trying to bring that in. So and in this idea finds
and the male is critiqued, it seems.
Yes.
Very seriously.
Very seriously critiqued. In fact, this is where I want to bring in the next play, which is Nagamandal. Very important, and I think this what is a kind of subtext in Hayavardhan becomes like the main text in a play like Nagamandal, because it's based on these oral folk tales from Karnataka as told to him by Professor A.K. Ramanujan, and the play begins with a story within a story, the framing story being that of the man and the flames, the man who faces the curse of death and has to keep awake all night. And the second is the story of the flames. The flames gather together in an abandoned temple as they tease each other and gossip. And here one is reminded of his use of the dolls in Harvadan, because the dolls are able to see through Padmini, her interiority, her mind, and how she dreams of this other man. And each flame tells the story of her household. And so, and there are some very interesting lines, like the young woman wrapped herself in the sari and stepped out just as the old lady was coming in. And thus the story and song created a feud in the family and were revenged on the old woman. So if you try to gag one story, another happens. I think this element of storytelling is there in all of his plays. And the style of that storytelling is very, very specific to the Indian context, with its use of folk tales, its use of myths, so which make it very, very interesting, I think, for the reader and the viewer both. So story itself is a character also in Nagamandal, personified in the play as it begins to narrate the story of Rani. And the story of the Nagamandal is known to all, where Rani is, this play has also been adapted into a film, Paheli. And Rani gets married to a Panna who keeps her under lock and key. So this local elderly woman, Kurudava, who can see through the plight of Rani, and she gives her this root to give to her husband. As the first attempt fails, she's scared in the second, and she just puts it in an anthill, and it's the cobra who drinks this root, this mixture of the root that's been prepared, and is besotted by Rani, and he takes on the form of her husband and visits her every night. So at night, it's the cobra, as man who's called Naga in the play. He visits her, and in the form of the husband, and in the daytime it's the husband who meets her. And as she becomes pregnant, she's tried by the village elders, and she performs the ritual of putting her hand in the cobra's hole. She speaks the truth and is saved. But the question that the play raises is the problem resolved? And some very important factors before I actually discuss the ending, the different endings of the play which are given within the play. So before we actually discuss that, I think some important factors that need to be kept in mind here. At the heart of the play is the story of a young woman whose upbringing has given her no knowledge of her own sexuality. First of all, because she's a woman who's just parceled off and left to the mercies of the husband. She's kept under lock and key, and as Kurudava actually approaches her and talks to her, the husband actually gets a dog and ties it outside the house so that nobody can even speak to her. Karnad presents a play that makes use of a folk tale, of course, and it's dramatized to talk about the subject of female sexuality. The woman needs to bring out, in a sense, that the cobra, so to say, is something that remains within, and that is what needs to be brought out. So the flames, of course, participate in and support the relationship between the Naga and Rani. So this play, more than any, is actually a play that explores female sexuality in a detailed manner, and is very, very, without overtly kind of doing it. It is a play that totally critiques and attacks patriarchy, the whole notion of marriage, how this very young woman is just kept under lock and key throughout, right? So of course, and that is what works against the husband, because he also can't understand how the Rani is expecting a child. So if you look at the different endings that are given to this play, the first ending, the story explains how, as the elders think her to be a goddess, they praise Rani because she's put her hand in the cobra's hole, and the cobra with its hood spread stands on her head. And the husband apologizes and she forgives him, and they lived happily ever after.
This is one ending.
This is one ending.
Okay.
And on being asked about the other stray factors in the play, they are said that it's a different story altogether, and they must go elsewhere to talk about Kapanna. But then the man asks them about Apanna, and the story is quick to add that they must think about Rani too, because she is sure to find out that Naga and Apanna are not the same person. So again, female sexuality, how her relationship with the husband is going to actually help her, is going to be revealing and is going to tell her that, it's not the same person. So in a comic note, the story remarks and says that, when you say they lived happily ever after, basically what you are saying is you sweep such headaches under the pillow and press your head firmly down on them. So I think Karnad is very witty here and is making a bold statement also. The second ending suggests the end with the death of the cobra. As he visits Rani, he uses his power to hide in her cobra-like tresses and is strangled by those very tresses. And Rani is once again likened to a goddess by her husband. But the flames are not happy with this. And they say, why is it that the play cannot end happily? And what does that happiness mean? The happiness is where Rani is able to express herself in her own manner with a person of her choice. So, the ending that is suggested by the flames is that Rani should hide the cobra in her hair. So just as the cobra comes and hides itself in Rani's tresses and she begins to comb her hair, the cobra falls and the husband Aparna goes out and to get a stick to actually kill the cobra. And Rani, knowing full well that the child is the cobras, is Nagas, she says, you should not come like this. Why don't you condense yourself and just hide yourself quietly in my tresses? So the happy ending is where both exist. So,
what does cobra stand for? Nag, that is.
As suggested here, I think that this is also an aspect. I mean, one, of course, we look at Naga as a character in the play who visits Rani and so on. But I think what he's also talking about is the hidden female sexuality that is there and how he's suggesting that that is something that needs to be brought out. I think that is, again, a very important factor.
And that suggests a kind of fulfillment. There's a kind of equality.
Yes, exactly. A kind of equality.
A stability that is based on the balance between the two.
I think more than stability, a kind of recognition by the woman of herself. That I think is kind of more stressed on. I don't know because the first ending is the stable ending in that sense, and they lived happily ever after. Because, but as Karnad rightly points out, basically that happiness only means that we are pushing all the contradictions under the carpet. And here that is not being suggested. I think it's more about the woman recognizing herself and what she wants. I think that
Dr.
is.
Parnapal, what is the folk tale that he's using?
There are two folk tales. One of course is the story about Rani and the cobra is there, and the story of the flames. The flames are there. That's again the encircling story. The flames are all talking to each other, and the flames are gossiping, and they're talking about. And the flames, when Naga and Rani are together, the flames surround them and they dance. So the flames are supportive of this relationship in a sense. And again, if we go back to Harvardhan, the dolls in that play, and the dolls are constantly commenting, and they are even almost, at certain points are very, very critical of the house in which they have been brought, because nobody is playing with them. And I wondered there, because the child that Padmini has is a son, so the dolls are lying all negligent and
when
nobody's
all this
playing
is
with
shown
them.
on the stage, what impact will it have on the audience when flames play around on the stage?
I think the impact would be tremendous, in the sense that even if we were at this moment to visualize the flames and this coming of the cobra taking on the human form and being with Rani, I think it fulfills the task that Karnad had set out with, to create a theatrical practice that belongs to India, to create a theatrical practice that is our own, and that allows us to develop the potentials of myth, of history, of orality, of folklore that India is really it revels in and is resplendent with.
Dr. Parnapal, you have been an actor. You have been on a stage. How would you visualize this scene? As it is offered to the audience. Think about it and tell us.
I think, as I said, that of course, the flames for me, if one were to be a part of a scene like this or were to put it up, then of course, the dance around Naga and Rani, I think that would be a very important moment. And the next important moment, at least for me, would be this complete critique of the happy ending, so-called happy ending, which of course is not a happy ending for Rani because her love lies with Naga. So I think the way in which, the humor with which that is employed when the flames talk to each other, I think for me that would be very, very interesting and would lead to some very interesting performances and conceptualizations on stage. So well, I hope you enjoyed this lecture on Karnad today.
Thank you, Dr. Payal Nagpal, for this wonderful lecture and analysis, and you have brought in your knowledge of the stage and you have gone into the various aspects of drama. Drama is not merely words, drama is not merely concept of characters, drama also means performance on the stage. And this writer is, as you have very rightly pointed out, is a person who is visualizing the whole thing, taking the stuff from the history, from folklore, and then dramatizing it on the stage in such a manner, that the audience finally gets the message in a very complex manner. Thank you, Dr. Payal Nagpal, for this wonderful lecture, and now we know much more about Girish Karnad and the Indian tradition, which also can offer a kind of appeal and life to the audience. Thanks a lot, and we should perhaps have another lecture by you on Girish Karnad, because you have so many things to say about it. And thanks viewers for this for viewing it, and if you have any questions to ask, you can send those questions to CEC-UGC Network, and Dr. Payal Nagpal is there to answer your queries if there is a chance. Thank you.
Thank you.